A litre of fuel or petrol now costs for more than 3 times what it did 9 months ago, while the price of staple food, rice, has more than doubled in the past year. Now, these two figures highlight the difficulties that many Nigerians are facing, as wages have not kept up with the rising cost of living. Like many nations, Nigeria has experienced economic shocks from beyond its shores in recent years, but there are also issues specific to the country, partly driven by reforms introduced by President Bola Tinubu when he took office in last May. Overall, annual inflation, which is the average rate at which prices go up, is now above 30%, the highest figure in nearly 3 decades. The cost of food has also risen, and all of this continue to pile up. But let's get talking, and I'm being joined live via Zoom by partner and director, tax reporting and strategy. He's with PricewaterhouseCoopers, Mr. Kenneth Erikume. Mr. Erikume, it's very good to see you. Good afternoon.
Nice to see you, Tolu, and thanks for having me on your program.
Yes, I think we should get to business. Nigerians want to hear from us. What is happening? I think I should start with the scarcity of petroleum products that we faced in recent times. We've seen how it has spilled over, and as at today, PMS sells for within 800 and 900 naira, depending on where you're buying from. Now, will this not affect some of the positives we've seen, particularly the decline in inflation and some good figures with the GDP that came up recently?
Thanks, Tolu. I think the answer to that question is quite obvious, that anytime you have increase in price in energy or petroleum products, that it would have a spiral effect into the inflation environment of the Nigerian economy. We've seen this happen over time, with the removal of fuel subsidy when this new administration came in. We've seen the impact of the change in the tariffs with electricity and how that trickled across. Again, when you increase the price of PMS, obviously what that means is that transport costs for workers and laborers would increase, and in turn their disposable income will be under pressure. And therefore what's going to happen is that they will begin to have conversations with their employers of wage increases and salary reviews. And again, the impact on transportation of food products from one point to another would also happen. And therefore, off the shelves in the supermarkets and the markets, the price of basic food items, as well as groceries and all that, would also increase. So, expectedly, while it is clear that, the CBN is putting in place monetary policy to sort of mitigate the impact of inflation, and we've seen some positive results, you are very correct, Tolu, that the increase in the price of PMS potentially would put more pressure. And therefore, the question is, how would the government, both from the fiscal side and the monetary side, how are they going to respond? Because we cannot continue to deal with these things using short-term measures, and those short-term measures without cohesion of the fiscal and the monetary policy would achieve, a short-term result. But we have to deal with the issue with some fundamental issues that will create stability in the ecosystem. And I think it all boils down at this point, if you ask me, to foreign currency. What are we doing in that space to ensure that our, the revenue stream that we get in foreign currency improves significantly? And then what are we doing on the cost side? Particularly, it was, and this is why I believe strategy is important. Because for many years, and government is a continuum. For many years, the expectation was that, with the coming on stream of the Dangote refinery, we'll be able to deal with some of the issues around importation of petroleum products, which takes a significant portion of our foreign currency. Now, we are at the zenith of that event, and it seems like we are struggling to get the right mechanism and the right structure to make the value trickle to the Nigerian economy. And for me, I think that this calls for an emergency for all stakeholders to sit down and begin to engage on this issue. Because, while we looked at the impact last year, we said, at some point it will come under control. Now we are in 2024. The reality is that we know that many of these policies are in the right direction. But then there are some things that, we all expect that, we should do at this point to ensure that the value and the benefits of some of these things that we have been trying to achieve, we translate that into the economy, and then it filters down into the common man. Tolu, I must tell you the truth, right? The reality is that a lot of people are under pressure, So when you look at the earnings of the low-income people, a lot of it has been eroded. So a lot of people are being forced into the poverty line. So we need to tackle the issue.
Very good way to start this conversation, I must say. And I like the fact that you said these policies are necessary, just like what the president said. But managing the fallout is what we've been harping on and saying, how do we get it right? So you talked about that there's some things that need to be done, and you mentioned the oil and gas industry, which is very critical to this conversation too. Now, there's something about pricing that seems to be an issue here. While I don't want us to dwell really on whether it's a refinery, local refining is key, but the pricing seems to be what we are not getting right. How does this really come to you with regards to that? The back and forth with pricing.
Thank you very much for that question. The back and forth on pricing, the reason why we're having those conversations around the back and forth on pricing is because the cost at which the product lands after clearing versus the ability of Nigerians to pay for the product is under contention. If we were talking about price increases, in the region of 300 to 500 and, so on and so forth, then, there'll be latitude to have a conversation, right? And that is the point, and that is the significant point that the government finds itself to say, okay, can we, in the interest of providing the benefits to Nigerian citizens, can we find a price point at which it is sold at the pump that would also support the cost structure of the importers and the marketers? And I think that that's why you're having those conversations. At every point in time where you have, disagreements around pricing, that is the sort of negotiation and back and forth that you expect. Now, I must tell you the truth that the reality is that this pricing is driven largely by the foreign currency, the exchange rate of the dollar versus the naira, because I believe strongly that everything comes down to that point around what is the exchange rate, what is the value of the naira. So, when we talk about removal of subsidy and non-removal of subsidy, it's a question of, how much do I exchange, dollar for naira, in order to pay for imports and to pay for products. Of course, the other thing that when you remove subsidy does is that it frees up revenue for government, right? And then with the floating of the exchange rate, the naira that government gets increases because, for each dollar of income that comes from exportation of crude, you get more naira. And that's why you see from the state's perspective, the revenue that is shared through FAC has been increasing significantly. So those are some of the things, that we need to contend with. So I think that if we deal with the issue of the exchange rate, stabilize it, and bring it under control, and this is why government needs to look more at the strategy. What is our strategy around improving production? What is our strategy around utilization of our gas reserves? And then what is our strategy to ensure that we, for the major portion of our imports that consumes our FX, which is petroleum products, what are we doing domestically to deal with that? Once we bring all of that under control, we stabilize the FX rate, that will then begin to translate to cost. And I'm hoping, that, one day we'll see a reversal of the trend, because we cannot just accept in other climes, when exchange rate goes up, it comes down, there's fluctuation, right? We've seen that is possible. I think that happened around May, that, the exchange rate dropped from 1,800 down below 1,500. So it is very possible to achieve that sort of price stabilization. And I think that more effort is required in that light.
Let's talk food. As we talk about the support that is expected, we see also that drive. Even at the moment, the Ministry of Agriculture going all around, trying to also augment, support federal government's efforts in that addressing this same fallout. But we know what the figures are showing us when we look at food inflation. So what do you make of that? And also at the quick wins, because you've highlighted some opportunities now, gas and all of that, how we can address high inflation, our FX market and all of that. But now let's look at food. Food security is very important, particularly at this time. How does it come to you, Mr. Erikume?
Yes, so interventions need to happen in that space. Especially for basic food items, and it has to be structured. So what we do not want is big bang approach. Something happens here, we try to fight a fire here and there. So lack of cohesion in terms of the strategy. So, for example, we have waived import duties on imported food items. Certain grains and all that. Of course, that is not a long-term measure, that is short-term, so that then you can boost your domestic production and ensure that you're stimulating the economy. The reality is this, Tolu, that in all jurisdictions, even in developed countries, there is significant subsidy in the agri-space. And these are some of the conversations that stakeholders are trying to engage on, right? Because what you do with the removal of fuel subsidy is that you have invariably taxed the Nigerian citizens, because then they have to pay higher for products, which is fine because you're bringing them to that level of what you would see in other jurisdictions. But then you have to then ask yourself, the gains we are making out of subsidy, where are we putting the funds? And you're very correct that government needs to then invest more in agriculture, and demand for discipline, even for the revenue that gets to the states. What exactly are your investments in agriculture to boost domestic production? Apart from that, and you talk about quick wins, so food is one thing. But then there are other things we need to deal with. For example, the issue of corruption. Because, one of the conversations that happened in the past is, you remove fuel subsidy, But then, does it get to the common man? Of course, it wouldn't get to the common man if there is no mechanism to deal with the issue of corruption. I think it was around 2017, where, one of my former partners, Dr. Andrew Nevin, put out a report on behalf of PwC, which estimated the cost of corruption. And in that estimate, then it was anticipated that corruption cost the Nigerian citizen at least $1,000 per person per annum. And it was estimated to grow to about $2,000 per person per annum. Because, what happens is that, you pay your taxes, it goes to government. Government is supposed to use it judiciously. But then if there is, I'm not saying government as a whole, but if there are leakages in the system, then it means that some of it does not translate back to the common man. And of course, it also impacts our human capital because fewer people, especially the poor, are unable to access healthcare and education. And for many companies, again, investment is a problem in a high corruption environment. So, there'll be weaker investments, especially foreign direct investment. And of course, the revenues would also be impacted because, there'll be leakages before you see what is reported. There will be significant leakages. So all of these things, we have to deal with the issue of corruption because, again, there is the trust deficit. We need to create and bring back that trust between, all the stakeholders, government, citizens, and so on, so that, the programs that are rolled out, there is buy-in and stakeholder participation to ensure, that it works. And then the issue of fiscal discipline cannot be overemphasized. And there are several thresholds that we have defined, by constitution or by regulation. We need to stick to them. We also need to enhance the budgetary process and ensure that there's transparency. So what we tend to see from all tiers of government is you see the budget, but then how the costs are incurred is not very clear. And there is no challenge around the value of projects that are implemented. And then we also need to deal with the issue, very important, of prioritizing public investment and ensuring that there is effective and efficient expenditure in the areas that will create value for the Nigerian citizens. So while we are working on all of this, we need to deal with the issue of FX. We cannot kick the can down the road and pay lip service to it. And it has to be there has to be, programs and initiatives that, impacts on everyone, So, one of the things I didn't talk about when I was speaking about fiscal discipline and the trust, right? For the citizens out there, it's tough to buy a liter of petroleum or of PMS, right? But the citizens also need to see the investments that, government officials and the general public are making in that space. So if I take the example of Argentina and a few other countries facing such economic, situations, there's a general tightening of the belt. The tightening of the belt has to be for all Nigerians. Everybody has to come together and say, let's tighten the belt and participate. Because this is our country. We've got nowhere to go and we have to make it work. So I think, in summary, the other things that needs to happen is around refining. Right from when I was born, we've been talking about, turnaround maintenance of the Nigerian refineries.
Yeah.
And they cost billions of dollars, right? And then they don't produce petroleum products. So again, is that the best strategy for our assets? Can't governments monetize those assets and quickly, get them to operate very quickly in the hands of under a public-private partnership? And then, of course, like I said, gas, and you mentioned the brass project, other projects. We need to use what we have competitive advantage on and ensure that we make them work. So that's pretty much the summary for me, Tolu.
Brilliant conversation as usual. I must thank you so much. Partner, Director, Tax Reporting and Strategy, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Mr. Kenneth Erikume. Thank you, and do enjoy your day. Have a productive one.
Thank you, Tolu. Enjoy.